Last week, the legislative session was over. MPPs had gone back to their ridings. And then the courts ruled that the province's legislation to limit third-party spending was unconstitutional. Now the government has recalled the House, invoked the notwithstanding clause of the Charter with the intention to throw out the court's decision. In this province, that's unprecedented. What to make of it? Well, let's find out. We're joined tonight in Honey Harbour, Ontario by Jason Leader, president of the communications firm Enterprise Canada and a conservative strategist who worked for former Premier Mike Harris and former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And in the provincial capital, in King West, Jenny Byrne, CEO of Jenny Byrne and Associates, former National Campaign Director and Deputy Chief of Staff to Stephen Harper and former Principal Secretary to Doug Ford. In the downtown core, Karen Brown, First Vice President of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. On the Danforth, Duff Conacher, co-founder of Democracy Watch, that's a government watchdog. And in North York, Michael Bryant, Executive Director of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and a former Attorney General of Ontario. Good to have you five with us tonight here on TVO for this very timely and important discussion, I would say. Look, you can't invoke the notwithstanding clause for the first time ever in Ontario history without provoking a bit of a reaction, so let's start there. Here's some of it. Sheldon, if you would.
It really just looks like a desperate man who is doing everything he can to cling to power by muzzling his critics.
They are looking for whatever tactical advantage that they can get their hands on. And so this is just the latest example. I'm promising all of you, it's not going to be the last time they perform in this despicable way between now and June 2nd.
The Premier is engaging in a blatant abuse of power, using the notwithstanding clause for the first time in Ontario's history for such a self-serving reason is outrageous.
Andrea Horwath, Stephen Del Duca, Mike Schreiner, leaders of the New Democrats, Liberals and Greens, respectively. And Bob Rae, the former Premier of Ontario, who's now Canada's UN ambassador, also weighed in on this, tweeting, "I voted for the Charter in 1982. This is inexcusable." We should just say before we get started here, I know everybody on this call knows what the notwithstanding clause is, but for those who want a little more explanation of it, we do have a few minutes long explainer on our website, tvo.org/the agenda. And if you go to social media, you'll see as well this explainer on social media. Essentially, it's a clause in the Constitution, in the Charter, that says, notwithstanding all these rights that you have, we, the legislature, are setting aside this decision because we got a better idea and we don't like the judge's decision. That's it in a nutshell. Let's find out what everybody thinks. Jenny Byrne, what do you think of the government's decision to use the notwithstanding clause?
Well, I actually have to say I'm a bit surprised at the controversy. I do realize it's the first time Ontario's ever used it, but it's not the first time it's been used. Quebec has used it numerous times, and in fact, they actually build it right into their legislation, so the decisions can't be challenged by the courts. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms would not have passed, would not be in law right now if it had not been for Section for 33, because the government of the day, Jean Chrétien, the Justice Minister, Prime Minister Trudeau, said that ultimately public policy should be decided by legislators and not by judges.
Karen Brown, what say you?
Well, this is really an inappropriate use. It's the government's attempt, it's a flagrant attempt to abuse power, and it's unfortunate. It's an attempt to silence the people of Ontario, and it's something that was supposed to be used in rare circumstances and not a tool to be used when the Premier is not happy with an outcome from the judicial system. It's inappropriate, and every Ontarian should be outraged.
Jason Leader.
I think, you know, when Jean Chrétien started getting money out of politics a few years ago, a couple of decades ago, I thought it was a really good movement. I give him a lot of credit for it. This is the logical extension of where we started there. You know, we started banning big donations. We started banning corporate and union donations. We started, you know, and federally, in this, we've got a law that's very similar federally. You can only spend $1.5 million on election advertising if you're a third party over a year. This is a very similar law. So the question is this law the right thing to do? I think it is. And I think free, fair, transparent elections are actually very important. So I support the use. I think it's a really good idea.
Michael Bryan.
This is extraordinary. It's never been used before. In British Columbia, when they passed a law similar to this, it was struck down. And when it was struck down, the province didn't invoke the notwithstanding clause. It was not even on the table. I think that this is misuse of the notwithstanding clause because it involves democratic rights. If it involved different rights, that'd be a different matter. But in this case, I think it is self-interested, and for that reason, it's a misuse of the clause.
Duff Conacher.
Well, it's clearly unconstitutional because it's violating charter rights. It's dictatorial and undemocratic. The government acted within 2 days, likely didn't even consult the members of its own party, let alone anyone else. It's not evidence-based because the limits are completely arbitrary, not logical, as Jason has claimed. And just like every other part of Ontario's political finance system, it's misleading. Jason just made a misleading claim about the limits compared to other limits in the country. Maybe illegal. Bill 21 is going to be testing that with the court cases as to whether the notwithstanding clause can be used by a premier or prime minister whenever they want for whatever they want. And it also, I think, shows that Ford has a real twisted sense of priority to recall the legislature to do this as opposed to addressing many other very serious problems in the province right now. That just shows a real twisted sense of priorities. Not the first time, and likely not the last time.
I didn't want to get into the nuts and bolts of the bill yet, but Duff, since you did say a couple of things about what Jason had to say that were a little on the tough side, I do feel obliged to let Jason come back and speak to those, and then I want to get back to the notwithstanding clause issue itself. So, Jason, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what Duff's talking about. I don't want to get into an argument back and forth. I mean, there's third-party limits in federal law. You can spend $1 million in the year leading up to an election. You can spend $500,000.
Not in the year. Not in the year leading up to an election. In the 2 months leading up to an election, you can spend $1 million. The limit does not apply beyond those 2 months. It's totally unlimited for the other 10 months in the lead up to the election. BC has more generous limits, also apply only for 2 months. These are just one of many misleading claims that the government has made about the limits. They are the strictest, and this government, the Ford government, has gone further than any other government in the country to restrict pre-election spending by third-party interest groups and voters.
I agree with that, actually, Duff. So is that you're arguing that's a bad thing? I'm arguing that it might be a good thing. I mean, there's a lot of people
didn't say it was a bad thing. Everyone agrees there should be limits, but they should be reasonable and democratic, and they should be set in a reasonable and democratic way, as opposed to being imposed in a dictator-like way by Ford.
Well, let me jump back in here, and just since we've got a former Attorney General among our membership here, I do wonder, Michael Bryan, if you can sort of put us in the room, because I imagine at some point over the weekend or the days before, the Premier of Ontario and the Ontario Attorney General would have had a conversation that would have gone something like Doug Ford saying to Doug Downey, okay, here's what I want to do. You got a problem with that? You've been there. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I think in these circumstances, that's probably how it works. The Premier probably gave the attorney an opportunity to talk him out of it. And then once that was over, the question was how to do this. And if the attorney felt so strongly about it, then he would have to consider what he would do politically. If he's silent with the media for a period of time, which is what Attorney General Mulroney did, whether or not this went to a full cabinet meeting or, as you said, was a phone call, I don't know. But the bottom line is, at some point, yeah, the attorney would have said, if you're going to do it, this is how you do it, and here are the risks in the event of a challenge, and he would be given a percentage as to what the risk was of a negative outcome.
Just by way of background, you referenced Mulroney there. That's Caroline Mulroney, who was the Attorney General 3 years ago when the government of Ontario first considered using the notwithstanding clause. And we don't exactly know what, obviously, their private conversations were like, but at the end of the day, both attorneys general said to the Premier, I guess you're going to do what you're going to do, and there you go, and neither one resigned. So that's what we know. Jenny Byrne, do you have any scuttlebutt about what might have happened behind the scenes, which eventually had Doug Ford come to the microphones and say, here's what we're going to do?
Well, I think it's evident based publicly that the Conservative cabinet and the Conservative government is very much in favor of this. I don't understand how this is infringing on democratic rights. All Ontarians are still able to vote, donate money to political parties, knock on doors, and participate if they want to run for office. What this does is actually curtail special interest groups. not voters. And so political parties are highly regulated. In corporate and union donations are banned and have to be disclosed. And so I think that in conversations that the cabinet had leading into the decision to invoke Section 33, or say they're going to invoke Section 33, it was to keeping with legislation which was spending limits for 1 year for special interest groups and for third parties leading into an election campaign, which was just extending it by the 6 months that Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals brought in.
Well, we have one of those special interest groups represented here. So Karen Brown, come on in here and tell us, is there anything you feel you can't do now that you could have done before because the law is being set aside?
And Steve, you know, the teachers, nurses, PSWs, we're not special interest groups. We're regular Ontarian citizens who want to hold this government accountable. And by invoking the Notwithstanding clause, they're shielding themselves. They're shielding themselves from the ability for us to criticize policy, to analyze, to be held accountable for some of their positions. It's going to restrict our ability to address some of our key issues in regards to school reopening, the government's record in regards to this pandemic, the failure to address some of the issues in the classroom for our members, issues such as healthcare, the issues of paid sick leave. This government has imposed this Notwithstanding clause on for self-preservation. It's really to protect his own self-interest and their government, and this really restricts the ability for us to talk about those key issues that are impacting our members and the public services.
Well, let's do a little comparing and contrasting here, because we essentially have two different bills that were/are at the center of this thing. If we go back 5 years to 2016, the previous Liberal government, led by Kathleen Wynne, brought in a bill called Bill 2. And let's bring up the graphics here and we'll show everybody what this was about. This was the Liberals' attempt to speak to campaign finance and what was allowed during campaigns and in the year previously. In this case, the Liberals banned union and corporate donations. They capped so-called third-party advertising. Elementary teachers would be a third-party advertising. And that capping of advertising would be $600,000 during 6 months before an election campaign. It lowered the contribution limits for individuals, and it introduced a per-vote subsidy for political parties. So you got whatever it ends up being, $2.50 per vote or something like that. 5 years later, the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party, when it formed government, brought in Bill 254. And that restricts third-party advertising further by extending $600,000 cap to 12 months. Remember, the Liberals were at 6, this one's at 12. So we're within that window right now because the election's in less than 12 months. It doubles the private donation limits and it increases the per-vote subsidies for political parties. Okay, we're comparing and contrasting here. Duff Conacher, what do you like? What don't you like?
Well, everything about Bill 254 was changing the rules in a way that favors Doug Ford's PC party and makes the system more undemocratic.
Just speak to that if you would. You're saying it's advantaging Doug Ford's Progressive Conservative Party. How exactly?
Yes. First of all, by doubling the donation limit. Democracy Watch looked at the donations the last few years. The PC parties are supported by wealthy donors who make the top donation more than the other parties. They get about 70% of their money from wealthy donors, from the top donors donating $1,000 and above. The per-vote subsidy is the most democratic part of the system, but the amount is arbitrary. And to increase it with no rationale, no study, none of the limits, none of the subsidies have been set with any study, and none of them are based on the fundamental democratic principle of one person, one vote, not even the per-vote subsidy, because you get the money even if you break all your promises after the election from the voters who voted for you right through until the next election. And then the third-party limits, Ms. Byrne said that they are only apply to interest groups. That's not true. Individuals are third parties as well, so they apply to all voters. And that limit is not democratic. One voter can spend $600,000. A group with 100,000 members, who are all voters, is also only allowed to spend $600,000. That's not a limit based on the fundamental democratic principle of one person, one vote. And that's why the Premier should back off, commission a study, and work with the other parties and set democratic limits based on one person, one vote for all the parties, the candidates and third parties, and make the system actually democratic in Ontario.
All right, let me go to Jason for some follow-up on that. Jason, let's just look at the specifics of the increasing of the amount that an individual can give, which Duff says advantages the Conservative Party disproportionately to the others. What do you say to that?
It advantages two parties at the expense of another party. I think Duff's looking at the last couple of years where the Conservatives, because they've held government, have had the most, sort of high-end donations. Truth is, up till now, the Liberals historically, going long time back, had a lot of corporate union donations and a lot of high-end donations as well. The Liberal money sort of dried up when they were sort of in the wilderness over the last couple of years. I actually expect the, if you're looking at a real analysis, that actually disadvantages the NDP. It advantages the Liberals and the PCs. I was just wondering, Duff. I mean, I keep hearing you talk, about the things that you're saying. What is the limit? Like, what limit do you think in the year would be a reasonable limit? So right now we've got a $600,000 limit. You keep saying you're for limits, but reasonable ones. So what is a reasonable limit to you? 600, or so it's more than 600. What is it exactly?
We need a study by a fully independent commission that studies what the cost is of actually reaching voters in this day of email and social media. The unions have one view. They believe that they can only reach voters through TV ads. That's what the unions has said in the court case. But obviously you can reach voters other ways. We need an independent study. What's the cost of reaching each voter per voter? And then all the limits and all the subsidies should be set based on that cost. It's realistic.
We let political parties spend 85 cents per voter. So we know that the maximum for the parties is about $10 million. So a party can spend $10 million. One of the contestants in the election can spend $10 million. We know that individual candidates can spend about $100,000 on their candidates. What is your number? I mean, I think 600,000 is a reasonable number. I think that's a reasonable number to be able to put. But what is your number?
I believe in evidence-based policymaking. So let's have a study, because all the limits that have been set to date across the country have been set arbitrarily by politicians without any study of the actual costs of reaching voters. So let's have the study. It would take a couple of months. Just call TV, radio stations, print media, social media, find out how much it costs to reach all Ontario voters with an ad campaign, and that should be the limit.
Well, let me jump in here for a second if I can, because I know one thing Duff has said publicly is he'd like the maximum individual contribution to be $100. Have I got that right, Duff?
Yeah, that's right. That's based on the median income of $29,000 and all the expenses that someone has with that.
Understood. Now, let me ask somebody who's actually... I want to ask somebody who's actually running... I get you. I hear you. I want to ask somebody who's actually running an election to talk to us about what the implications of that would be. So, Michael Bryant, if everybody were restricted to a maximum contribution of $100 as opposed to more than $3,000, which is where the current government has it, what would be the effect of that?
I think on local campaigns, it would have a massive effect, or a significant effect anyways. I always think of campaign finance as really falling into two general categories. One is what's used by the central party. That's going to be, by and large, done by television, radio, internet, advertising. And with respect to the local candidate, they usually don't raise enough or are not able to raise enough to do that kind of advertising. So really they're paying for space and literature and getting that out and some staff. So that would have a big impact on the local campaigns and their ability to raise about $50,000 to $100,000 in order to run a competitive campaign. If you're not able to raise that much, it's going to be more difficult to get your message out, and you're going to end up being totally reliant on the central campaign. The central campaign, in turn, will be restricted as to how much they can raise. And I just want to finish by pointing out that this isn't just about the money raised and spent and the advertising or the speech, the arguments that come out. It's also about what the voter gets to learn. So what this means is it's putting a cap on how much the voter can hear from all of these various voices. So these voices are this is literally a voice that's being heard. So when we talk about restrictions around spending, we are talking about restricting the amount of information that gets out there for voters to consider before an election.
All right, let me get some follow-up on that. Karen, if all of the teachers that you know and represent were limited to $100 per person per campaign to contribute, what do you think the impact of that would be?
I think it's a much bigger issue. It's not just about the amount of money. It's really about that whole limiting the ability for our members to engage around the issues for a full year. 6 months was prior, and when in the government's own documents that they submitted to Justice Morgan, they said 6 months was reasonable. Here they're just picking an arbitrary limits. For us, it's the integrity of the system. It's the ability to have dialogue on the issues that have been impacting our members in regards to funding for education, in regards to support for students with special needs. It's around issues of paid sick days. It's around long-term care. It's about our ability restricting that dialogue and that conversation for a full year, really silencing. And what we need is a government, we need leaders who can stand up and be accountable and are able to defend their positions, defend their policies. And this just provides a shield where this premier doesn't have to do that.
Well, let me understand what the number is then. Let me understand the number. How much money do you think the elementary teachers need to take out the ads to make the points that you have just made here?
And it's not about money. We need the opportunity. We were working within the guidelines. This government has just arbitrarily expanded that to their benefit. And we want to be able to fairly engage in a process, and it's about fairness, and that hasn't been established. I can't give a number, but we've worked within those limits. This government now is just arbitrarily has extended that for their own self-interest, for their own political gain. This is not how a democracy operates. The people of Ontario deserve better from our premier, and their voices need to be heard throughout this process.
Jenny, I should get you to speak to that angle of the story, because the fact of the matter is the government is setting the rules unilaterally for the game that everybody is about to play. And there are some people obviously watching this who will say to themselves, well, that's not really all that fair. Shouldn't they all agree together on what the rules are? What's the response?
Well, I think that this is legislation. Governments in power bring through legislation. Kathleen Wynne brought through the previous act that you talked about without consultation from the other parties, and there was a disagreement on that. But I would like to say to Karen, this absolutely, obviously, is about money. There is nothing stopping us, third parties, unions, corporations, businesses, from actually talking about what their concerns are leading into the election. Karen's on TV right now talking about it. You can reach out to voters. There are a lot of ways to connect with people. This is 100% about money and the ability. And if you're taking, if I'd like to say to Duff, so you're saying that voters, that the average person can only donate. You're suggesting $100 per person. So are you suggesting then that unions and corporations and third parties actually have then a more disproportionate ability to influence elections when they have absolutely no accountability or reporting mechanisms like political parties and political candidates have?
Go ahead, Duff. You want in on that?
Sure. No, I'm not saying that. The limits obviously for third parties would be less, because as the Supreme Court of Canada ruled back in 2004, in the case that Harper brought before he was Prime Minister against the federal limits, we need, you could have a whole bunch of third parties ganging up on one candidate. And that one candidate has a spending limit, so the third party limits have to be lower than that. But let's have an independent study of it. And I'm not calling just for a $100 donation limit for individuals across the board. There should be also per vote funding and matching funding, which Quebec has. And that subsidizes the amount that people can raise. But again, based on the fundamental democratic principle of one person, one vote, as opposed to allowing wealthy donors to use money to unethically and undemocratically influence candidates and parties.
Can I get Michael Bryant on this angle, though? I want to go back to the original question I asked Jenny, which is it right for the government of the day, as the Wynne government did, as the Ford government is doing, to set the rules of the game in which they are clearly about to participate? What do you say?
Yeah, no, I mean, the CCLA opposed the Kathleen Wynne bill and the limits put in there, and we said that before the legislative committee. We were ready to challenge that law as an intervener when it was going to the court, and then we ended up intervening on the matter that it was heard by Justice Morgan. Parliament never gets the last word, but it gets the word, and it is going to be controlled by the majority. Yes, it does seem unfair, and it could lead to things like gerrymandering, which is why ideally what would happen is that we do with spending limits what we do with the actual constituency boundaries, which is we create a third-party mechanism, such as having Elections Ontario, an independent body, hear from all the parties as to why we ought to have a limit at whatever it is, 100, 1,000, 100,000, a million, and then you get an independent say. It's similar to what Duff is arguing for. It's just a little bit more like the CRTC and setting prices around what you can charge people. It would be a similar idea, but even then you would put that into place and then that could be overturned. So some of this is, in fact, democratic. The question is whether or not it's constitutional and whether or not a government can do this to its benefit. The problem being that under the Charter of Rights, the democratic rights under sections 3 to 5 cannot be subject to the notwithstanding clause, along with, for example, the mobility rights. And the idea was that the framers of the Constitution said, look, there should be some things that are off limits for parliaments to overturn courts. And I would say that this falls into that category, but it's not self-evident because those sections were not pled in the case. But I think that would be the argument for it, and that would mean that governments have to comply with the Charter of Rights and not get the last word. Why? Because that's what our Constitution says, and you would need a constitutional amendment to change that.
Well, Michael, you've mentioned the framers of the Constitution, and I happen to be sitting in a studio right now named after one of them. I'm in the William G. Davis studio at TVO, which was created by Bill Davis when he was Education Minister. And I can't help but remember that in the middle 1970s, when this issue came up, he appointed a committee of conservatives, liberals, and New Democrats, and then gave the job, I believe, of overseeing election expenses to the former head of the New Democratic Party, Donald MacDonald, to deal with this. It was an all-party solution to a situation where all parties were affected. And Jason, I guess I'm going to put this question to you. That seemed like a pretty good idea 45 years ago. Why isn't it today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've got a lot of sympathy for that, and the points that Michael's making in terms of some sort of not the CRTC, Michael. The CRTC doesn't have the best
fair.
Something like the CRTC, where you get a group of sort of wise people who get together and do it in a nonpartisan way. But I think, Steve, it's a reasonable question. But the question really is, do we want more money in politics? Like that's actually what this is trying to do. So there are, like Michael's arguing, civil liberties. Duff's are arguing something slightly different. The Teachers Federation, God bless them. I understand why you're arguing. You want to run a lot of ads in the upcoming ads. Groups like Ontario Proud and Doug Ford. I don't think it's self-evident, by the way, that this advantaged Doug Ford. There's a lot of right-wing groups like Jenny and I could have run an arms race here and got a bunch of people to donate millions of dollars and run pro-Doug Ford ads as well. That's off the table as well. There's a maximum there as well. Ontario Proud spent a lot of money. I think they were the top spender in the last election campaign in 2018. They're going to be sort of hamstrung and hobbled down to $600,000. So, Steve, I think your idea is actually, it's a great question on why you don't do that. But the fundamental question is, do we want more money or less? Do we want this kind of arms race? Do we want more attack ads? And I grew up in Southern Ontario. All I got, no cable. All I got was Buffalo, Detroit over the airwaves. In election season, all it is attack ads on sheriff, on governor, on whatever. And do we want more of that or don't we? And that's really the fundamental question that we're looking at here.
I'd like to get Karen to speak to that because, in fact, the government House Leader, Paul Calandra, in recalling the legislature, it's he who is responsible for doing that, said that the new legislation is intended to protect the individual rights of Ontario voters and protect our elections from American-style super PACs and their big money political influence. That's what they say is at the heart of this, Karen. Do you have reason to dispute that?
That's ridiculous. Super PACs, no, the power of super people in Ontario coming together to hold this government accountable is more like it. This is absolutely nothing like American style politics. There were limits in place. I'm not arguing that there shouldn't be limits. Limits were in place, but for a government to arbitrarily just change those limits, to restrict voice, to restrict the amount of dialogue that we can engage with our members, the amount of issues that we can hold this government accountable for over that time, over a year of dialogue, of engaging in robust conversation. This is what it's about. It's about, in essence, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, freedom of speech and freedom of expression. This is not a democratic crisis for this government to come in and to impose the notwithstanding clause. This is really to stifle the voice of Ontarians, to restrict really legitimate criticism about the track record of this government. Yes, we'll have an opportunity to engage with our members in many ways. We will continue to do that. We will continue to work with coalitions to hold this government accountable on key issues. But what has happened with this notwithstanding clause, it is really limiting the amount of time that we can have that dialogue. And that's not what a healthy democracy is about. And every Ontarian should be really concerned in regards to charter rights being restricted and overruled by this premier.
Duff, should we be concerned that American-style super PAC attack ads are going to come here if we allow more time and more money into the system here?
Well, the limits were already in place. The Wynne government brought them in. It's just that they were arbitrary. So this is not about the question of limits versus no limits, because no one who appeared on Bill 254 at the committee called for no limits. Everyone supports limits. The question is, are they going to be reasonable democratic limits set in a democratic and reasonable way? Or, as what's happening right now, is Ford just going to pick a number off the top of his head and pick a time period off the top of his head with no evidence, no study, and impose it like a dictator would on everybody, voters and third-party interest groups alike across the province. That's an unreasonable, undemocratic way to do this.
Okay, let me go to Jenny on this. Jenny, I think it was 8 Fridays ago that Doug Ford had that disastrous news conference where he essentially tried to, shut down society, give the police all sorts of powers they didn't want, and his poll numbers went right into the dumper after that. But in the 2 months subsequent to that, he's actually brought it back. The government changed its strategy on some things, and we did a poll that's going to be in the On Poly podcast showing that the Premier's back in first place in terms of who would you vote for if the election were held tomorrow. And it's a pretty even split on whether people approve or disapprove of how well he's done handling the pandemic. In other words, he's brought himself back into the game. And my question from a political strategic point of view is, why drop this nuclear bomb right now to set things off again when he'd started to bring himself back into public acceptance?
Well, listen, I think there's going to be, that's the great thing about democracy, is that in less than a year, Ontarians go to the polls and they can vote, and it can be on a whole host of issues. It can be on on financial, it can be on democratic issues like this, on the government's COVID response. I'll be honest, I am not sure how many people, I think this is a very big lightning rod for people like us, the chattering class, for the media, and of course, some unions and special interest groups. I'm not sure that the average Ontarian sitting back and wanting to enjoy their summer is going to be paying attention to this. And if they are, then the onus will be on third parties and unions and the opposition and anyone who's opposed to this to decide whether this is going to be the issue that they run on during the next election campaign.
Michael Bryant, it's a fair point. Is this something that the pointy-headed academics and the media types and the chattering classes, as Jenny calls them, really care a lot about, but the everyday Ontarians just don't?
Well, I don't know, but let's assume that is the case, in which case there's 2 reasons why this was done. Number one, to start a fight with with people like me, to start a fight with pointy-headed Toronto elites. And that's a good thing for Ford Nation going into an election. And secondly, it shores up their support. The reality is, when you look at how much the Conservatives, Liberals, and NDP are going to spend in the next election, there is not a gigantic difference because of the limits that are in place. Basically the government, this government and the Liberal government, took away about $10 million worth of free speech. We may not like the attack ads, but people are grown up enough and capable enough of deciding how they want to take that speech. We've taken about $10 million worth of ads in speech, and we've removed it from the electoral debate. And it is unquestionably, if you look at where that $10 million was going to be spent, to the advantage of the incumbent government. It is true that it is possible that Ontario Proud and a couple of other organizations, maybe like the National Citizens Coalition, might raise money to a level where they could compete with some of the voices that have been in place and were spending the way that they were spending before the limits were put into place. But really what this does is it shores up a political advantage from a spending perspective for the incumbent government. And that's I think what the problem is, because then in the next election, if or whenever a new government comes in, then they'll bring in limits that shore up an advantage for them. And as Duff said, that can't be the best way to do it. And that's not the way Premier Davis did it. And I would agree with that latter approach.
We're down to our last minute here. Jason, let me give it to you. And again, we go back to the political calculation. Do you think that the Ford government has made that political calculation that, okay, we don't mind getting a bunch of pointy heads in Toronto upset about this, but regular people aren't going to care?
I do think they've made that calculation. I think free speech, I hear more about Bill C-10 in Ottawa right now than I've heard about this on my Facebook or, that kind of thing with regular people talking about it. And, I go back to my, there's been a lot of debate here, Steve. I go back to that philosopher, the oracle that I always listen to, Bernie Sanders, who said, money isn't speech and corporations aren't people. You could use the word unions, corporations, interest groups, all that kind of stuff. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but, free speech, people, our free speech is guaranteed. The question of whether or not I should be allowed to do $700,000 or $100,000 or $1 million worth of attack ads, that's a different question.
That was a good debate, everybody, and we thank you all for coming on to TVO tonight and having it. Jason Leader, Michael Bryant, Duff Conacher, Jenny Byrne, Karen Brown. Stay safe, everybody, and it's great to have you on our program tonight.
Thank you.
Jason, I'm getting that clip of you citing Bernie Sanders, and I'm going to send it to you every single week. I did it for you. He's my oracle. Yeah, and apparently I'm a pointy-headed Torontonian. So says I.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.